Hello, and welcome to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything strategy. Each week, we'll share a new episode covering a wide range of topics designed to help your business grow smarter and make strategy approachable and actionable. I'm Devina, Strategy Execution Director at Cascade.
And I am Miriam Lisa, Strategy Execution Director at Cascade. Hello, everyone. We're excited to have you with us today. So this is just the beginning. Stay tuned for your weekly episodes. Before we dive in, let me thank our sponsor today, Cascade. Cascade is the #1 strategy execution platform. Cascade helps turn visions into reality by working as the strategic brain of your organization. Thousands of top organizations use Cascade to plan, execute, and track their strategies in one place, improving efficiency and speeding up decision-making. So now let's get started. So Devina, I'm so excited to be back with you today on the podcast. And we have a very, very interesting topic. We're talking about the art of strategic focus. So it's very interesting because we hear this a lot as we're working with organizations that they struggle with like a strategic overload almost.
Right.
There's too much going on. It dilutes the focus. And ultimately, when you check in with employees, they feel certain fatigue or they feel like their impact isn't fully seen. They don't really feel fully connected to the bigger vision of the organization. So all in all, it's like, how can we work towards creating an impactful strategy that employees feel connected to, feel empowered, and feel like they're truly making an impact without getting stretched too thin, feeling that fatigue, or feel like they're running like on like a really low battery in many ways. So that's really what we want to discuss today. And why don't we get started, Devina, and understand a little bit better, like if anybody of you, of the listeners out there, either you're leading an organization or you're working in a high impact role in your organization where you can have influence on the strategy execution, what are some signs that help to recognize when your organization is suffering from strategic fatigue?
I think this is, first of all, such a fantastic topic. One of the things that Miriam always says that I really resonate with is that strategy is an art, not a science. And I think as we get into this topic, we'll start to see more of that essence come through. And when it comes to recognizing strategic fatigue, I think we first of all need to define what that overload looks like, because I think that varies across organizations, individual teams, and leaders as well. You know best what is your overload and what takes you into that red zone, and making sure that, you know, it's a fine balance between what you can achieve and actually what starts to detract from quality. So high levels of burnout and disengagement is something that we might associate with this fatigue. You see that the employees and your team members have that lack of connectivity, but also low visibility can be an implication of this. So not having the understanding of whether your execution and whether the driving force of your team is actually delivering on your strategy. And that could be a result of many competing priorities, even conflicts of interest, which I find really interesting to evaluate in your strategy. Are some things that are butting heads and going against each other? Also, another systemic symptom, I would say, is you might see increased turnover. So you might see that you have a high turnover with senior leaders, and they may be feeling overwhelmed or ineffective in their roles. And the continuous shifting in priorities and goals can lead to a level of frustration and also uncertainty. And ultimately, all of these things take away from the execution of your strategy. So it's important to go to the root causes and the source. A good example that I always refer to, Miriam, when talking about strategic fatigue is Kodak. So they had their classic struggle, right, of understanding where to focus within the film and the photography industry. And whilst many of their competitors started to pivot towards the digital space, they didn't do that. And that potentially led them to many missed opportunities, right? And I think this lack of focus strategy is that sign of what could be strategic fatigue. But there's all kinds of things that you can do to also spot the signs and move away from that, which we'll get into as well later today.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because the way I think about it as well is strategy, culture, and leadership are so closely connected, right? So at the end of the day, even if you build out that fantastic strategy and it is very, very focused and it's probably very executable and you have everything ready on paper to essentially bring it to life. But if the leadership and the culture are not working hand in hand with that strategy, it's like I always see that as a bit of a triangle, those three belonging together closely and working hand in hand. So to me, especially something like strategic fatigue, oftentimes I think, of course, you can solve a lot with creating more focus, helping organizations like here using the 80-20 rule or something like that. How can you do something with 20% of the activities and get 80% of your impact?
Right. That's a great one.
Yeah, but in many ways, like, again, it's helpful to help teams prioritize and get more into that. But in many ways, I think it's also a mindset, and it's also the leader and how the leadership in general is thinking about not only priorities, but also how they're maybe tasking your team with activities or how things are being trickled down. What is the sense of urgency that is being created in the organization? And of course, you want to achieve things, so you want to create a sense of urgency. But is it created in a way that creates more stress? Or is it created in a way that is empowering and helps teams to really like thrive in helping to execute the strategy? And the one example I want to mention here is, for example, if you're a leader and you ask your team member to execute something and you say, okay, get me this by end of the week, let's say, or let's say by tomorrow, right? Like fast. You want something fast. Yesterday, ideally yesterday, of course. Then it always like sets this precedent of, okay, there's some sort of stress. But like, what about if you as a leader would turn it around and you ask your employee, by when do you think you can get that to me? And I'm sure your employee will probably tell you even sooner than what you ask them to do, because that's just how also human nature and how we want to work. Or if you have a psychologically safe space, they'll also tell you, look, maybe there is travel this week or so many other things going on. I will get this to you in by end of the week because of all these other priorities. Now, as a leader, you can push back and be, okay, this is actually priority, so shift those other things out of the way. But either way, it creates a conversation, creates trust, creates a relationship, and you create more empowerment for the employee to almost take back some of that control.
Right.
And that's an important element to avoid strategic fatigue, burnout, 100%. Anything that kind of gives you tension in many ways, right?
100%. Yeah, and I think this comes back to the fact that we're humans, ultimately. Exactly. We're not machines.
We're not machines.
Yes, exactly. And as a leader, I think it's important to build those relationships with your team based on mutual respect and that trust as well. And I think, to your point, we're actually quite reasonable as human beings as well. And you might find, as you said, sooner or shortly thereafter, but the quality would be greatly improved, I think, when you remove the stress element to that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're enhancing morale, motivation, empowerment. Exactly. So I think those are important things to think about. And that goes back to how do you lead your team in many ways, right? How do you share back any tasks? Because that's usually, I think, the worst thing. And I'm sure everybody out there has probably experienced that at one point, is like when you get bombarded with these ad hoc tasks of, okay, give me this tomorrow, give me that on Friday or whenever. And you're like, oh my God, right? It creates that stress. So how do you still get what you need from your employees, but in a way that creates a more psychologically safe, empowering, trustful.
Right. And minimize distractions, I think, is the ethos of that. Distractions that probably ultimately take you away from what you're truly trying to execute as well. Another analogy I've used with this, Miriam, is that your windscreen is foggy. And you're kind of charging ahead, but you're getting distracted by the fog. And actually maintaining that focus is super important for the execution, but the morale and culture that you're creating as well. And I think this is probably something that maybe leaders underestimate, empowering your teams and having that visibility. It can go such a long way. Like even what you just mentioned, giving them the choice. When can you get this to me? This is also akin to what they say for child psychology growing up. Rather than telling them what outfit to wear, give them 2 choices, give them three options, and then they feel great about what they're choosing.
Exactly.
Rather than resisting an option that you might be telling them to wear as well.
And I can attest to that.
Yes.
It makes your life easier, and it makes everybody's life easier. Right. And usually you'll see, I feel like the choice is usually not like a crazy choice, right? Like usually people are, again, human and make the right choice anyways. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's dive a little bit more into some practical steps as well to move from an overload to more impact. And again, I talked about this earlier in terms of you have almost those 3 elements, right? You have your strategy, you have your leadership team, you have your culture. They're all closely connected. So we'll walk through a couple of practical steps now, maybe that are more connected to what you can do in terms of your strategic setup to help prioritize and move more towards impact, but always with an eye towards how can you also manage through that as a leader to build a more empowering culture. So I'd love to hear from you first, Devina. What do you think? What is a good way, if you detected your teams are fatigued, where do you start?
I think it's a great place to begin with some kind of audit, some kind of stop check of where you are. Actually review all of the initiatives that you have in the mix at the moment, categorize them, and be really brutally honest with yourselves. How well aligned are they to your core goals? What is the resource intensity of them? And what is the expected impact of them? And I think if you have a really brutally honest audit and review with yourself, you're going to find potentially some bitter pills to swallow, right? A leader might discover that half of their team's time is being spent on projects that don't really align with the company mission or vision. And whilst on surface, that might be a shock to the system, it's actually a great place to pivot. It's a great place to then recalibrate and move yourselves away from hitting worse fatigue or even worse focus, right? And I think that audit piece really helps you to reset your baseline. I also think this is where a leader can rely on the brilliant expertise around them. One perspective is exactly that, just one perspective, right? And whilst you would have a own individual unique perspective as a leader or potentially a C-suite member, it's important to understand perspectives of those around you who might be more closely related to the execution. So get this full audit and make sure you start from a place of true, brutal honesty and understanding as well.
Yeah, I love that. So important. I would say kind of what goes in line with that is this prioritization in general, right?
Like a married couple.
Exactly.
Those two.
Prioritize, and you have to always have to reprioritize, right? Because the priorities are shifting as well. But whether you prioritize as a leader for your team or you empower your team, ideally as well, to prioritize based on the bigger strategic goals, based on urgency, based on impact. There are so many tools out there that you can help them with. And also, again, going back to that element of culture, if you're building a culture to empower them to say no as well, which is the hardest thing ever to do, right? As an employee, why would you say no? You would never say no. but maybe it's not right now, right? Maybe it's okay. Again, like empowering your team to not just say, yes, I'll do it tomorrow, right? That's not going to create a culture that is going to thrive. You also want to create a dialogue. You also want your teams to be able and allow them to speak up. So maybe that not right now is maybe the way to go. Or maybe it's not about just saying harshly, no, I'm not going to do that, because nobody's going to be happy when you do that. Maybe it's about challenging and creating the space for the question of like, why do we need to do that, right?
Exactly.
Like, do we feel it's truly aligned to what we are prioritizing here and there? And I mean, I can tell you out of my own experience, that does work. And it does also help to, well, it helps for your own prioritization, but it also helps the organization to have an environment like that. If your team members actually challenge you on things.
It's a great thing, right?
Yeah, it is.
I also think it's a sign that you've hired well in your leadership team. Yeah, I think creating that environment, as you said, is important, but also getting their perspective and experience, right? They're in these roles for reasons. And if they feel that, you know, something you've proposed potentially has flags, has considerations, great. You know, you tell me about them, because that might be a perspective I'm missing. And I think it's important for you as a leader to create that feeling of safety too. You know, creating yes men around you, you know, quote unquote, is not a good thing for you and your business.
Totally agree. What else do we have as a practical tip?
I have a good one here, Miriam.
Go for it.
So, maybe this is just beyond strategy, but less is always more.
Yes.
We talked about prioritization. Leading on nicely from that is picking your big wins, right? Guide your team to pick 2 to 3 high impact initiatives and goals for a very clear time frame, whether that's quarterly or annually. Doing less within that period actually ends up being more for your business. Going back to the ethos, we're only human. Well, human beings can only do so many things. So you would rather your team focus on 2 to 3 initiatives that are really going to move the needle forward, rather than be working across 10 that are done to a poor quality or a poor standard. And I always look to Google as a great steward for this. They actively use the OKR method, so objectives and key results. And as part of their strategy, and they'll communicate this too publicly, they are very selective about the projects that they work on per year. They have, I don't even know the number of arms to their business, but they have so many. But you'll see that each one is not massively progressed year on year. They'll pick specific arms to their business, whether it's keywords and ads, whether it's more of their research analytics, maybe it's also their phones. You know, they pick very specifically what they choose to progress every year. And I think that's a fantastic thing. Apple also do the same. Not all of their products receive an update every year in September, only a few. And I think it's a good ethos for us all to focus on those few big hints.
Yeah, so true. And again, it's like, well, you always have to go back and think about, like, are these still the right big wins, big bets that we have to focus on, right? 100%. And evaluate that, and not continuously run with it either. So yes, I totally agree. And with that, I would also say, if you have those big bets, like, I think that's a great way, again, like, as you're working with your teams and you're thinking about, you don't want them to burn out at the worst. You don't want them to be fatigued. You also don't want them to be stressed, and you also don't want them to eventually become someone who might think, oh, I might actually leave this company or something like that, right? Like a flight risk. So you have to think about as well, how do you build a certain buffer in everything that you do for your team, so that they can be empowered with the work that they're doing and feel that they have that impact that we talked about. So I think in many ways, and again, it goes back to my triangle analogy with the strategy, culture, and the leadership. If you have this ruthless prioritization and this clear focus in your strategy, how do you then lead your team and take from that strategy to also empower them, create those spaces, create those breaks in your day, right? Like allowing them to recharge, reassess, maybe have even creative breaks as well, because we all know if you continue to just work, the creativity is going to go, right? And we can debate
100%.
whether or not you're productive at the end of the day. But I mean, even for myself, I can say it. I know, Devina, we talked about that as well. Like, you need the space to think
100%.
and then come back to your task. And then, I mean, personally, I can say I come back and I can accomplish something in a very short amount of time, but I need the space to think. Without the space to think, it's incredibly hard to come up with these,
I agree,
like, more probably better ideas in the end. So
I agree.
And that's what I always think, like, in terms of like well-being for organizations. It starts with the leaders, right? Like, you can have all of your well-being programs in the organization, and that's all nice. But at the end of the day, it goes back to the leadership and how they allow their teams to kind of create their own most impactful day to accomplish what needs to be accomplished without micromanaging either, right? Because then that also kills creativity and empowerment and all of the good stuff that you want your employees to do.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to kill those things. And actually, Miriam, on this, one of my old strategy directors that I used to work with, she used to encourage strategy safaris where you would quote unquote go out into the wild. So as an example, this was to do with e-commerce and retail. So we would go out into the stores, into shopping malls, and explore real life competing products, real life experiences as a customer.
We would do that too, and you need that. I love it.
Yes,
yeah.
And strategy safaris, whatever that might look like, maybe it's going into cafe, whatever it might be. Maybe it's going to a butterfly garden. I don't know, just thinking off the top of my head. But strategy is something that is living and breathing, and I think you need to be actively out also creating almost these areas of opportunity to be inspired by as well. As exciting as your job may be, sitting at a desk at your laptop or in a glass box in your office, that's not where you're going to come up with your best and kind of most creative ideas. So going out into the wilderness, quote unquote, I think is good for you, and
whatever that might be for an individual, right?
Exactly. Whatever that strategy safari might be, I think go out on safari, right? Get out there and encourage that too, because I think, coming back to this ethos too, we're human beings. We need to change the scene. We need to kind of almost maintain that momentum.
Yeah.
So definitely would actively encourage you as leaders also to maybe take your team on a safari, whatever that might look like for you.
Yeah, move, right? Like move your body, like get out and do something else. Yeah, I love that.
Right.
So true. And then I guess like the last element really as a practical tip as well, when we're thinking how to like be more focused and all of that, it's also communication. And I mean, we say that in many of our podcast episodes. It's like helping not only your team consistently understand what the focus is and like literally over communicate that, but then also help them understand, okay, what is the next big milestone, and give them like notice in advance, right? Like it doesn't need to be, oh, next week this. It's like build a schedule, build a strategic routine, build some sort of governance around it.
I like that.
That helps everybody be prepared of like what's to come, right? So that they can individually organize themselves, plan their little strategy safaris in between as well.
Right.
But they kind of know what's to come. So I think people strive more when there is some set structure in a bit of a timeline or some frame. But then they can create their own days and their own weeks and how they get to whatever is being asked from them or whatever they need to work on to create an impact in the organization. But they might need some little like markers along the journey.
Yeah. I like that.
To continue working.
That.
Yeah.
I think that also feeds into our human mindset. If we want to see progress, we want to almost see the outcomes of what we do and kind of get that gold star sticker as well. So I love this. I also don't think you can communicate and over kind of structure these things, because I think you'll find the right organic routines and cadences for your teams and organizations depending on what you do.
Yeah, totally. So I guess we're gonna get close to wrapping up, but maybe a few words about how to manage strategic burnout or strategic fatigue. And I know we already talked about that a little bit as well. It's just, again, it's important to build something that is sustainable, right? Whether it's your strategic routines that you build around it, whether it's your targets that you set up, like whatever is in many ways manageable for you as an individual and as a team, to kind of like move forward. And I think it is really important because sometimes I think there is this, oh my God, we really need to do this or that in our organization. And then they do something really cool about well-being and everybody gets really motivated and feels like engaged and empowered again, or like a cool onsite or this or that. And that's all nice. You need those little injections. But then how do you build something that is sustainable so that your teams and employees come to their desk every day and feel motivated, right? And it goes a lot back to the leadership and the culture and like the appreciation of the teams, so that they truly feel empowered ultimately.
Yeah, I like that. You're trying to build something sustainable, right, Miriam?
Exactly.
Not just a quick Band-Aid.
Not just a quick
fix.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
What else would you say about just like managing more of that strategic fatigue?
I think probably this is probably a quite nice way to almost wrap up some of the themes that we've talked about. It's making sure that you revisit your why with your organization, realign your team and your own personal goals in your position. Why are you doing this? What is the company vision? What is the company mission? What are the values that you want to embody along the way? I think going back to that at any point in your strategic execution journey is always good. It's never a bad thing. And I think that can really help you to work through burnout, but also avoid it. Keep coming back to that. Make that your epicenter, if you will. And that kind of goes hand in hand with some of the tips we talked about, the art of saying no. How do you regularly review what you do? How do you celebrate the progress, but also stay in this continuous improvement mindset as well?
Yeah, I like that. It's a continuous journey, right? So I would say, just to close the episode today, again, like it's important to regularly check in many ways and recognize when you see strategic overload or fatigue in your organization. Check in with your teams, talk to your teams, not only your direct reports, talk to the teams on the ground, like see what they have to say, because they'll tell you the
100%.
truth. But that obviously also requires that you power an environment where they feel they can say what's going on their mind, where they're allowed to say, I feel burned out, I feel overloaded, I feel like I don't have time for anything. Create that space, check in with your teams. And then I think what's also important is, again, like we talked about it a lot, like prioritization, your key goals, whether using a method like OKR or whatever it is, to bring you back to the why and your key goals to prioritize, helps you, helps your team, and helps your entire organization to really drive with impact towards what you want to achieve. So I think those would be like probably my two key takeaways. But I'm wondering if you have any additional closing thoughts, Devina.
I think probably maybe my addition here is that everything we talked about in maintaining focus and kind of avoiding some of these pitfalls, it's all around holding yourself accountable, right, for your part in the puzzle. So that would probably be my other almost thought to leave you with, is look in the mirror, really, and think about how you ultimately as a leader can help and manage your team through these periods, because it is an art, it's not a science. And I think it's okay to recognize some of these pitfalls, but then figure out the path to get out of them again.
I like that. Yes, it comes back to taking responsibility for your own time as well, and for your team, obviously.
Exactly.
Amazing. So
Great.
I would guess that wraps up today's episode. And we hope you found it insightful and that it helps you on your journey to better strategy execution.
And make sure to tune in to next week where we'll be talking about another super exciting topic. It's going to be another great episode filled with a bunch of practical tips that you won't want to miss.
Yes. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the Ultimate Strategy podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Also, check out the links regarding the resources mentioned today in the episode's description. Big thank you to our sponsor, Cascade, for making this podcast happen. Also, make sure if you like this episode, leave a comment, give us a rating, or leave a star, whatever you want to help more people like you discover what we're doing here and support this podcast.
And thank you so much for listening. And remember that great strategies are only as good as their execution.
So take action, make it happen, and see the results. See you in the next episode for your weekly dose of strategy.